I have 3 films submitted by the community that I am going to be examining the cinematography of. Welcome to Cinematographer Reacts, the show where I look at your lighting, contemplate your compositions, all so we can grow in our art together. My name is Ben McLean, I'm a working cinematographer, and I wanted to see your films so that I could rate and react to the cinematography. One of the things I want to say before we get started is that cinematography is subjective and it is an art, and what may not work in my eyes may be a masterpiece in someone else's. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, and it's all for fun. I'm gonna be honest, this is the second time that I've actually sat down to record this video. The first time I tried to real-time blind react to the films, and it kind of led to a chaotic energy where I was just pausing and restarting all of the films and going back, and it didn't really allow me to have cohesive thoughts on the cinematography itself. I wanted to try a different format now, where I've already watched the films and sort of digested the project as a whole, and I can come back and sort of share my thoughts collectively. It's important to remember that cinematography lives within a storytelling context. It's not just about making pretty and pleasing images. It serves to be the visual language of a story, and it's important to understand that context when examining. So for each of the films, I'm going to be sort of giving the context of what the story's about and the tone. That way, we can sort of better examine what we're looking at for the visual language. For each film, I'm going to sort of pick and choose scenes that I want to talk about, and then at the end, I'll give an idea of my collective thoughts on the entire thing afterwards. Shall we get started? Our first film is called Bathroom Time, and it was submitted by cinematographer Ryan Thomas. For context, it is about a protagonist who works in an agonizingly slightly dystopian office where their bathroom time is tracked, and several people all want to use the bathroom for various comedic reasons. I really enjoyed watching this, and I can't wait to get into it. So let's get started.
Five minutes of bathroom time remaining.
This is the opening shot of Bathroom Time, and it is a strong opening shot. We're on a nice wide-angle lens, I'm guessing on a full-frame sensor, and we've got some very good natural pleasing lighting, alright? It sort of serves to set the tone for the piece, and I think we have a great color palette. So the lighting here in this shot is nice and soft. We definitely, can tell that there's maybe some windows or something from the left, and, we get just a little bit of wrap past the nose, and, we have some nice contrast. My guess is that you have a nice large frame over on this side, maybe like a 8x, or maybe it's a little closer to 4x. It might be a closer source just because the fall off across the skin, it's a little brighter over here, and the inverse square law will make it feel a little bit more sourcey for that reason. So it might be like a 4x that's a little just out of frame, but my guess would probably be like, a 6x or an 8x a little bit further back. And I'm guessing that you're creating some of the shape here on the shadow side with some negative fill. Probably because of how dark it is over in this corner. I'm guessing that there's maybe like a floppy solid over here on this side, giving you that shape. It works really well to create a natural lighting for the piece. I think the lighting feels really natural and grounded within a sort of like corporate, workspace. I want to talk about this choice to have the main character just barrel down the lens and on a wide angle frame as well. It's kind of off-putting, but we get to sort of see into her soul. We can see that the story elements that she's just completely dissatisfied. And it works really well to sort of give the audience an interesting perspective into, who we're going to be watching throughout this. I want to talk about this shot because it illustrates, I think, a difficult part of cinematography. I think you've set your exposure quite well, to make sure that we're not blowing out all of these windows back here. We have all of this detail back here, and, we've got these shades that are cut and level and stuff like that. But in a shot like this, where do you put the lights? And I think in this one, you don't. I think you just leave the natural lighting, and that's probably what you did. In order to, sort of give any sort of this backlighting that you want to your characters here, you would have to have large units off frame here with difficult, maybe possibly like ceiling rigging or something, all blasting this way to compete with this light. But I think instead you just let this be maybe like a stop or two overexposed, and just enough so that you could get some detail as you're looking into the shadow side, backlit by these windows, and it matches that previous shot as well. So that's not easy to do, and I think you did a great job.
Are you okay?
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
It's okay. No. It's okay.
After the character walks down a hallway, she ends up at the bathroom door where she's confronted by another character. And it's in this really tight hallway space, which can be very, very tricky to light. So I want to talk about it for a sec. If we're looking at this scene, we have a couple interesting challenges. First off, you don't have a lot of room to bring in lights over here. You've got this wall that's just a couple feet off to the side. So, I mean, where do you put your lights? Also, how do you keep depth in this image, right? You know, it's not easy, you know, to have these bright skin-colored, skin-tone walls behind your characters and keep her, you know, a half stop brighter than what's going on back here, or maybe even a full stop. It's not very easy. You can see that you've got some sort of source a little higher that is still giving you that great wrap just past the nose. It's easier to wrap past the nose the higher the source is, but it can also lead to these shadows that you've got right here. And but I think it feels really, really natural, and it's great. A great time to talk about contrast ratios as well, right? This is not a very wide contrast ratio that you've selected for the film, because I think you want it to feel natural. I don't think you want it to be some, you know, dramatic sort of lighting, and that makes a lot of sense within the tone of the piece. And so you might be using some fill, or you might be just using the ambient of the room, and this source up here isn't, you know, extremely bright. But you've done a good job of keeping the shape in a difficult position. And another shot that I want to talk about with that is this one. I want to talk about this shot from this scene as well, because it's even more difficult to create depth when you're so close to this wall, right? It's very, very easy to make this situation look completely unnatural, because if your light source is too close to the talent here or to the wall, it's going to be very bright over here and fall off unnaturalistically to the other side of the thing. But instead, you still have that shadow side. You still have, you know, a nice key on the talent, and it looks like it fits within the world of the film. And if we go a little bit further, my initial guess on how you lit the scene was probably with like a light mat or a tube light, maybe rigged on a spreader across the hallway. And so I paused it on this frame just because we get the biggest hint towards what you might have used. You get something that's a little bit longer and narrower in the reflection of her eyes. So I'm guessing it's, you know, like a 1x2, 2x4 light mat, or, you know, maybe just some mascaras. But either way, it's a difficult hallway to light, and I think you did a great job. The last shot I want to talk about is this final scene that happens in the bathroom. It's an excellent choice to go with this 360 pan to place the audience in the room and sort of grasp the chaos of what's happening in a funny way. The challenge with a 360 pan is that you're going to see any sort of light stands that you rig. So where do you put the lights? My guess here is that you either threw some sort of diffusion skin over the house lights in the room, or use that same, you know, light mat or stair tubes on some scissor clamps, or, you know, maybe a spreader bar up above. And I think you did a good job skirting it. We definitely have a, you know, top-down, sourcey sort of feel. We can get these shadows under the eyes from that, but there's not too much level spilling onto the wall back here, and I think that's because, yeah, you have it skirted with some sort of, you know, some duvetine or something, or some party cloth. I think it's a great choice to shoot this way, and it fits the tone of the piece. Alright, so here are my closing thoughts. You clearly have a lot of skill. You can tell just by looking at this light box that this is a really well shot film. Your contrast ratios are well maintained throughout the entire film, which is not easy to do, you know, going from a wide open space to shooting in a nice tight closed space. And you made everything feel married together, which is, you know, the bread and butter of a good experienced DP. I really enjoyed some of the bold compositions and framing that you went with, like the wide angle shot for the opening shot and the 360 pan and in the ending. I've also decided that I'm going to sort of give some sort of constructive criticism to every film that I am sort of rating and reviewing the cinematography for. I decided that I'm going to be giving some constructive criticism to every film that I review the cinematography for, no matter how good or bad it is. And that's because I think As a cinematographer, it's important to constantly be looking at your work and asking how you can improve it, what you can do better, because every project has those things. It doesn't matter how long you've been shooting. With Bathroom Time, I think even though I enjoyed some of the bold choices, like with the opening and closing shots, I think that some of that boldness could have been carried through the rest of the film. I think that some of the dialogue-driven and exposition-driven parts of the film are all shot with a rather neutral sort of framing and composition. And while they look great and the lighting looks really natural, I think that if you consider each shot in a film as part of a sentence that's telling a story, then we can be a little bit more bespoke with the visual language that we're using to tell that story. For instance, in this shot right here, where the main character is walking down this hallway, there's a simple neutral dolly back, but what if the shot was sort of given through like a high angle and the camera is up in the corner of the room, almost from like the perspective of a security camera? And I think that could, possibly reinforce that idea that the employees are being monitored and simultaneously looking down on our character as she's having this moment of weakness where she's going to the bathroom to cry. Just a consideration. Maybe, we can use some higher or lower angles on the dialogue scene. Shots like that may also work in a scene here, where it's just a standard 3-shot of characters standing in a hallway. We can also maybe get the camera a little higher or lower to display some of the power dynamics of the characters and who they're talking to. Maybe, we could obstruct the frame with some things in the foreground. I think when all of the dialogue and exposition shots sort of have this neutral lens and framing and composition, I think it can maybe feel a little bit sitcom-y or commercially, but that's just my opinion. Overall, I think you did a fantastic job. I think this film looks incredible, and it was absolutely hilarious, and I think that you, at a lot of times, do a great job of visually reinforcing the humor that's in it. Thanks for the submission. This next film is called Dandy the Flower, and it was submitted by director and cinematographer Jonathan Peterson. This film is about a man who hears the voice of a flower, and the conversation changes his perspective on finding ways to appreciate the little details in life. It's your literal stop and smell the roses sort of story. One thing I want to note about this project is John let me know that he shot this on the Canon T4i using Magic Lantern to record RAW. And that was my first camera 12 years ago, 15 years ago when I was getting started with cinematography. So it's cool to see that camera is still being used today and, it still creates great images.
Down here.
What?
This film really only has 3 main scenes to talk about, so I'll talk about each of them. It's mainly shot using natural lighting, but I do think that there's some hints that has been augmented with some modification, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But I just want to talk about this excellent composition that you end up landing on here. I absolutely love it. I think that there are some really natural lines with the grain that can sort of point to our character here, and it's beautiful. The profile sort of, gives us that outside looking in perspective to the conversation that they're happening, and just this backlight with the sun here is absolutely stunning to create the shape that we want and separate our subject from the background. I think the only thing that can make this better is if we had some sort of like grass here in the foreground, like poking up or something, just to, give us a little bit more of the layers that you can create in the image. But overall, I think this is absolutely beautiful. The reason I think the lighting was modified in this is because if you watch one of these shots, you can actually see, there's a little bit of movement on the light, and I think that's because someone is Hollywooding a reflector, or it's up on a stand and it got a little windy and it moved the reflector. But it's great to know that you're not just out with a camera and pointing it at the compositions that you want. You are thinking about how to shape the light, even outdoors in a day exterior, and so that's great. And the shape looks fantastic. The compositions here, I think, are really strong. How do you do an over-the-shoulder of a flower? Well, you figured it out. I'm guessing that, it's hard to get the camera low enough to do this shot. You probably raise the flower up some way. But having that perspective of looking up at the main character really does, sort of put you in the scene a little bit more. And, we can continue talking about how you might have modified this, because, I think you're losing a little bit of light in your time of day. The sky's getting darker back here, but this doesn't look like hard sunlight. There's a little bit of softness as it wraps across from bright to dark on the forehead. So, this is probably, I'm guessing you had one of those, 3-in-1 reflector foldouts, and that's what you were using for this, especially because it was flopping around in the wind earlier. But I think you did a great job making this shot and this scene feel really warm and welcoming, so that the audience can be a part of that lighthearted conversation. And the last thing I want to say is that it was great to use the long compression of a zoom lens here for this final shot of the film. And the crop sensor is also doing you some favors here, because you can frame two characters that are so far apart for this joke to land, where you can see the main character close and the gardener in the background. And it was funny, and I loved it. Good job. All right, my final thoughts are that this was a great piece. I think you did an excellent job. I think that the tone is consistent throughout the whole film, which is, again, difficult to do. And the tone is very warm and inviting, and it sort of imitates and emulates what the protagonist is feeling, and I love that. I think you did a great job choosing the framing and composition for the coverage of your scene. You're not just pointing the camera at the action arbitrarily. There's thought going into the framing for each of the shots and what that shot does. I think overall, to just continue growing within your art as a cinematographer is really just going to be finding more complex and difficult projects to work on. I think you leaned into the strengths of shooting this project really well, using day exteriors, using the late time of day to get the beautiful golden hour lighting. I think there was a little bit of difficulty when you needed to marry that with a day interior, and the difficulties of the dynamic range of the T4i as well. But with the budget and crew size, I think, of a project like this, and even just the goals of a project like this, it's completely understandable. Next up is a film called Lucky Us, and I'm not sure if it was submitted by the director or the cinematographer, but the DP in the credits on this one is Elise Gorka. For context, this film is about a group of friends that hang out in a house, and one accidentally offs himself. They accidentally call the police instead of who they were trying to call, and they reflect on the choices that got them there. And the tone of this one is also, at least through some of the dialogue and camera choices, supposed to be a little bit silly. So I wanted to just preface that it's, while it may be about a darker sort of story, it's done in a funnier tone.
Of course, the signs to the left and the right indicate that these fields are available for fox hunting. Happens every fall. Every fall, the woods are filled with hunters. You hear the horns blaring, the horses charging.
The opening scene here is about the group of friends walking to the house that they're going to be staying in or hanging out in. I'm not quite sure. It wasn't fully clear. But the one thing I want to mention is that the camera work here gets a little bit distractingly shaky. It's okay to be handheld, I think, but I think the camera rig, whatever it was, needs a little bit more weight or something to stabilize it, so it doesn't have quite this jittery feeling. There also doesn't seem to be too much sort of light modification or anything with the natural light that's being shot in, and I think what that can ultimately do is lead to compositions where there isn't a lot of shape within the frame, and it looks just a little bit flat. And so I would encourage, for these outdoor setups, choosing a good overcast day can definitely give you a certain tone that I think you probably wanted for this film, but we do want a little bit of depth in the image to maybe bring in some, negative fill or something to just create that shape. The characters move to this scene that takes place in the living room where they're hanging out, drinking, and having fun. And the one thing I want to say about this scene is that the framing and the blocking, it kind of lacks a little bit of motivation. It gives the sense that the camera is not so much a character in the scene as so much as it's just sort of pointed and arbitrarily aimed at whatever's happening on screen. And the eye lines also can get a little bit confusing here. People end up being on different sides of the screen as we cut for the coverage. So the encouragement here would be to really think about intentionally what the camera should be seeing and what it shouldn't be seeing, right? Anything that's out of frame is just as much a choice as what's in frame, but also just the height of the camera, the angle of where it's at in the room. Can you decide on that 180 that the conversation's happening within? Can you keep the camera on that side? And when you are going to break that 180, how can you reestablish that scene geometry so that, the viewers don't get confused? I think a lot of that, could go a long way in a scene like this. I wanted to point out this scene that takes place in the kitchen because I think that it really does look like the best in the film, and whether that was just because of the space that you chose to shoot it in, or it was an accident, or for whatever reason, I think it's worth looking at and evaluating what looks best in the film so that you can sort of take those lessons onto, you know, the future choices that you make. And it's because, you know, a lot of the light is cut from this room. It's in a sort of darker room, but they have light coming from an external source that's lighting their faces, which creates that natural depth within the image. They're in this room where they've got this, illumination coming from somewhere else, but the walls are darker. There's that separation between the subject and the background. And it happens, you know, to coincide with, you know, a moment that there is more drama within the film. So I think it's the strongest point to talk about this scene where you're in a darker room and it's a more contrasty room. There is more emotional contrast and drama of what's happening on screen. And so if that choice was intentional, which I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and say it was, great job leaning into that aspect of working within the space and pulling that out. I love the headroom that you give on this shot. It really gives us uneasy, but it frames for the character as they move into the shot. And notice that the camera's locked off now as well. It's not this, you know, sort of chaotic handheld. I think that there's intentional decisions being made here, and I think that's why that scene works better than any of the others that you had in the film. I thought you did a great job on this one, and I think that there's room for improvement, but, you know, I think that these projects are just as important as, projects with more intention put into them when you're learning to become a cinematographer and to find your unique eye. And that's because finding something that doesn't work is just as valuable as finding something that does work, right? You know what to avoid in the future. I think from the high level view of a film, when you look at it like this, you can sort of see that the contrast ratios and the color and palette are a little bit all over the place, but, you know, I think that the budget and crew size sort of lends itself to that and on a project like this, where it's probably just a group of friends making a film. So, you know, don't knock yourself for stuff that you didn't even try to do. I think that you definitely want to try to be more intentional about your framing and compositions. Definitely ask yourself every time you're setting up a shot, why is the camera here, and what does this say about the story? What does this sort of reveal or reflect upon that's happening within the characters or the scene? Either way, I really enjoyed it. I think you did a great job, and can't wait to see what you do next. That is it for this week. If you want to watch the films that we reviewed today, the links for them are in the description. Also, if you'd like to submit your own films, there's a forms link down in the description as well. If you have any different opinions or anything like that for some of the films that I reacted to, then go ahead and leave that in the comments. I'm sure the original filmmakers would love to see those as well. But until then, keep those cameras rolling. I'll see you next time.